The world just crossed a line it cannot uncross. Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya headquarters, the Joint Military Command in Tehran, has formally declared banks and financial institutions across the Middle East legitimate military targets, not pipelines, not warships, banks. Citibank branches in Dubai and Manama have already been hit by IRGC drones. Goldman Sachs employees across the Gulf now need command approval just to enter their own offices. Standard Chartered cleared its staff from the Dubai International Financial Center. HSBC shut every branch in Qatar. This is not panic. This is the architecture of a new kind of war where the battlefield is the balance sheet. Tehran is telling the world something Washington refuses to translate honestly. When you bomb Bank SEPA in the heart of Tehran, killing bank clerks, not generals, the response will not come in a desert. It will come at the corner of finance and empire. Dubai, the city that sold itself as the Switzerland of the Gulf, $126 billion in sovereign wealth fund flows, Amazon's cloud infrastructure, the world's busiest international airport, is now inside the kill radius. Bahrain, the tiny island kingdom that hosts both the U.S. Fifth Fleet and the region's most concentrated banking sector, sits directly in the crosshairs. Vessel traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has collapsed to 1/5 of normal levels. Brent crude is up 20% since the war began on February 28th. Stock exchanges in the UAE and Kuwait have suspended trading. The Dubai gold market is throttled. An Amazon Web Services data center, possibly the first in history damaged in active combat, took shrapnel from an intercepted Iranian drone. What you are watching is not a regional skirmish. This is the first war since World War II to strike directly at the cities and systems that run the globalized economy, and it has only just begun. Now let me understand, and I mean really understand, what happened on February 28, 2026, because Washington is still not explaining it to you honestly. The United States and Israel jointly struck Tehran in the early morning hours, exploiting intelligence that told them Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, would be meeting with his senior security and military command in one location at one time. They used that window, they took the shot, and within hours, before the smoke had even cleared over Tehran, Iran had already launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles simultaneously across the entire Gulf region, targeting Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and U.S. military bases scattered across all of them. The United Arab Emirates received the largest number of Iranian strikes, followed by Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman. This was not improvised revenge. This was a preloaded response, years in the making, waiting for one trigger, and that trigger was pulled. To understand what Iran is actually doing right now, you have to throw away the old map. You cannot read this war through the lens of Fallujah or Mosul or even the 2006 Lebanon War. Those were territorial conflicts, wars fought over land and checkpoints and cities. What Iran has constructed deliberately, methodically, over decades is something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous to the architecture of globalization itself. Tehran's strategic objective is to prolong the conflict long enough to reshape the broader strategic environment surrounding the war and to generate pressure across multiple domains: energy markets, maritime logistics, regional alliances, and domestic politics within the United States and its partners. Read that slowly and read it again. Iran is not trying to win a conventional war. Iran is trying to make the war so economically catastrophic, so financially unbearable, that the political will in Washington and Tel Aviv collapses faster than the political will in Tehran. That is the doctrine. That is the engine behind everything you are watching unfold. And the financial targeting, the banks, the institutions, the clearinghouses, is not incidental to that strategy. It is the strategy. Iran's IRGC threatened to attack economic centers and banks with links to United States and Israeli entities in the Gulf region after what it claimed was an attack on an Iranian bank with the war in its 12th day. Since then, many banks like Citibank and HSBC in Qatar have begun shutting, further threatening global financial stability. Think about what that sentence means in practice. Global financial institutions, institutions with trillions of dollars in exposure to Gulf markets, institutions that process the oil payments that keep the global economy breathing, are pulling staff, closing branches, and quietly evacuating their most sensitive operational functions out of a war zone that 3 weeks ago was supposed to be a neutral commercial hub. The entire post-1970s promise of the Gulf that these states had permanently stepped back from weaponizing oil and finance has been incinerated. For decades, Gulf states cultivated reputations as dependable energy suppliers, deliberately stepping back from the weaponization of oil and gas after the 1970s. Dubai sold itself as the Switzerland of the Middle East. Bahrain positioned itself as the region's premier offshore banking center. Abu Dhabi structured itself as a sovereign wealth fund colossus that would quietly own significant chunks of Western financial infrastructure for generations. All of that branding, all of that carefully engineered neutrality, all of those hundreds of billions of dollars in lobbying, relationship building, and diplomatic soft power, all of it has been tested against reality in the span of 2 weeks, and reality is winning. The Iranian attacks and the viral photographs and videos of flames rising from a hotel, an airport, a port in the Emirates, and the energy infrastructure in the region foreground a certain brittleness and threaten that sense of security and prosperity. Now, here is what the mainstream conversation in America is missing entirely. The Gulf states did not want this war. They actively, desperately, quietly lobbied against it. They bought American weapons, they hosted American bases, they invited Trump to their palaces, they pledged trillions in investment deals, they pumped extra oil onto global markets to keep Washington happy, and none of it was enough. When it mattered most, their lobbying to avert an American war with Iran was outweighed by Israel's push for one. The Gulf Arab states had placed enormous faith in their integrated air and missile defense systems. They had made the extraordinary decision, overriding deep historical and cultural reservations, to share real-time intelligence and radar imagery even with Israel. And now they are watching Iranian drones arc over their cities anyway, watching their airports take shrapnel, watching their hotel towers burn on international television, watching the foreign investment flows that fund their entire social contract with their own populations start to slow and hesitate and reconsider. The presence of Western military bases, alongside logistical and intelligence networks tied to regional security alliances, makes the Gulf states, in Iranian calculations, an inherent part of the landscape, even if they do not directly participate in military operations. This is the core of the Iranian logic that Tehran has stated openly and that Washington refuses to engage with honestly. Iran is not claiming it wants to destroy Dubai or annihilate Bahrain. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson told CNBC plainly that Tehran feels no hostility toward its Gulf neighbors. But in the same breath, he stated that all military bases, installations, and assets that in any form or manner are being used to help the aggressors are regarded as legitimate targets. And there you have the strategic trap that every Gulf state is now caught inside. You cannot host the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain and simultaneously claim neutrality when America is bombing Tehran. The geography makes the neutrality a fiction. So what is actually happening on the ground right now in March of 2026 as this war enters its third week? Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz slowed to a standstill, with 150 freight ships, including many oil tankers, stalled. Qatar's energy minister has already warned the world that if the conflict continues, Gulf energy producers may be forced to halt exports entirely and declare force majeure, and that this will, in his own words, bring down economies of the world. Stock markets experienced declines, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling over 400 points on 2nd March. Broader economic forecasts warned of inflationary pressures and slowed global growth if the conflict prolonged. The UN World Food Programme is already warning about long-term increases in global food prices driven directly by this conflict. Americans sitting in Ohio or Georgia or Texas wondering why their gas prices are spiking and their grocery bills keep climbing. This is the direct transmission mechanism. The Strait of Hormuz is not an abstraction. It is the artery through which 20% of the world's oil flows, and that artery is currently in a war zone. By the onset of Operation Roaring Lion and Operation Epic Fury in February 2026, Iran had entered the conflict with a rebuilt arsenal of approximately 2,500 ballistic missiles and thousands of unmanned systems. This is the part that the Pentagon's public briefings consistently understate. After the 12-day war of June 2025, the earlier shorter confrontation, Iran spent 8 months quietly, methodically rebuilding its stockpiles. The doctrine underpinning that rebuilding was what Iranian strategists called deterrence through cost imposition. Every dollar America spends intercepting a cheap Iranian drone with a $100,000 Patriot missile is a dollar Iran counts as a victory. Iran's asymmetrical playbook has made the war more expensive for the U.S., which has been forced to spend money replacing stockpiles of expensive missiles like Tomahawks and defensive systems such as Patriot and THAAD interceptors. The arithmetic of asymmetric warfare is brutal and simple. The side with cheaper weapons and higher tolerance for pain wins the war of economic attrition. Tehran appears to be fighting a war of endurance. Prolong the conflict, expand the economic battlefield, make the costs increasingly prohibitive, ration advanced capabilities, and impose steady human and financial costs on its adversaries, all with the hope that political tolerance erodes faster in Jerusalem and Washington than in Tehran. And there is already early evidence that this calculus is beginning to bite inside Washington itself. Questions about the cost of this war are creating genuine political friction for the Trump administration. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has already gone to reporters and told them publicly that Trump is plunging America into another endless Middle East conflict. The American political immune system, conditioned by 20 years of Iraq and Afghanistan, is starting to activate. But here is what makes this moment categorically different from Iraq or Afghanistan, and why the financial targeting doctrine matters so much more than it appears on the surface. Iraq and Afghanistan were wars fought in countries that were not integrated into the global financial system. You could bomb Fallujah without triggering a credit event in London. You cannot bomb the Gulf, not in 2026, not with this level of economic interconnection, without sending shockwaves through every pension fund, every sovereign wealth fund, every trade financing facility, and every energy futures market on the planet. Driving up global energy prices and shaking financial markets signals clearly to the international community that the war will not remain geographically confined to the region. It will eventually be felt through energy markets and the global economy. The aim of this strategy is to force major powers to exert political pressure on adversaries, or at least push for a de-escalation before economic damages become impossible to reverse. Tehran understands something that Wall Street has not fully priced in yet. The Gulf is not just a geography, it is infrastructure. It is the plumbing of the modern global economy. The underwater fiber optic cables that carry international financial data run through the Gulf. The cloud computing data centers that process global transactions are built in the Gulf. The liquefied natural gas terminals that keep Europe's lights on through winter are in Qatar, which is inside the strike radius. Top technology companies such as Google, Microsoft, Palantir, IBM, Nvidia, and Oracle, as well as the listed offices and infrastructure for cloud-based services, are also located in several Israeli cities and in some Gulf countries, which Iran has also threatened to attack. When Iranian strategists say they are targeting the economic infrastructure of their adversaries, they mean it with a precision and comprehensiveness that goes far beyond oil wells and tanker routes. Iran has built a doctrine based on survival, endurance, and long conflict. Rather than seeking immediate battlefield dominance, the strategy focuses on resilience, adaptation, and endurance. The assumption is that if the state survives the early stages of war, the longer timeline of conflict may create opportunities to shift the balance. And the state has survived. Despite the assassination of Khamenei, despite the destruction of significant portions of its ballistic missile infrastructure, despite the near total elimination of its blue water naval capacity, Iran's surface combat capacity has been reduced by approximately 85% following the destruction of 11 Iranian naval vessels in the Gulf of Oman. Despite all of that, the IRGC is still launching drones. The financial threats are still operational. The Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed to normal shipping. Iran is still in the fight, and that fact alone is strategically significant. Over-reliance on the United States has become increasingly untenable for Gulf states, as they have grown doubtful that Washington can manage the escalation it initiates, deter retaliation against Gulf partners, or take responsibility for the aftermath of a crisis that unfolds on their doorstep. That sentence, written by analysts at War on the Rocks, captures something that diplomats in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are thinking but cannot say in public. The American security umbrella, the arrangement that has governed Gulf geopolitics since 1945, has been tested under live fire conditions, and it has produced enormous collateral damage for the very states it was supposed to protect. The UAE got hit harder than any other Gulf country. Bahrain, home to the Fifth Fleet, has been struck repeatedly. The very act of hosting American military power has made these cities targets, not protected them from becoming targets. The crisis also underscores the failure of the Gulf states' hedging strategy, aligning with the U.S., keeping Israel at arm's length, and simultaneously engaging and seeking to contain Iran. That balancing act has failed to keep the Gulf out of the conflict. And here is where the long-term consequences of this war become most profound, most structural, and most consequential for the kind of world that emerges on the other side. The Gulf states are going to have to make choices after this war ends about their security relationships, about their economic architecture, about their tolerance for American military adventurism conducted from their soil that they have been carefully avoiding for 30 years. The financial targeting doctrine has forced that reckoning. When your banks close because you are on the wrong side of someone else's war, you start to ask very hard questions about whose war it really is. And right now in Manama and Dubai and Doha, those questions are being asked in every boardroom, every royal court, and every intelligence briefing that matters.